In the bitter winter of 1672, in the small German village of Rothenburg, 9-year-old Elias Zimmermann learned that the world was not the safe haven his mother had promised him it would be. He learned that faith could become a weapon, that neighbors could become executioners, and that love, even a mother's love, could not protect the innocent from the machinery of fear. This is the story of a boy who witnessed the unthinkable, told through eyes too young to understand the evil that men do in the name of righteousness. It is a story that echoes through centuries, a reminder of humanity's capacity for both cruelty and the desperate need for mercy in a world where both were scarce. Elias Zimmermann's world was small but complete. Their cottage sat at the edge of Rothenburg, where the cobblestone streets gave way to muddy paths that led into the dark Franconian forest. His mother, Anna, was a woman of quiet strength, her hands always busy with herbs and remedies that she gathered from the woods, her voice soft when she sang the old songs while grinding roots for the village baker's wife, or preparing poultices for children with fever. "Mother, why do people come to you when they're sick?" Elias asked one autumn morning, watching his mother hang bundles of dried chamomile from the cottage's low beams. Anna paused, her weathered hands still holding the twine. "Because God gave us plants to heal mankind. Every leaf, every root, they're gifts. My grandmother taught me, just as her grandmother taught her." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. What he did understand was that his mother was different from the other women in the village. She read, not just the Bible, but other books too, ancient texts with strange symbols that she kept hidden beneath loose floorboards. She knew things: which herbs would stop a bleeding wound, how to ease a difficult birth, when the rains would come by the way the wind shifted through the trees. In 1672, in the Holy Roman Empire, such knowledge was becoming dangerous. The 30 Years' War had ended just 24 years earlier, leaving Germany scarred and suspicious. Villages like Rothenburg had lost nearly half their population to disease, starvation, and violence. In the aftermath, people searched for explanations, for someone to blame for their suffering. The Catholic Church, reasserting its authority in territories reclaimed from Protestant control, found convenient scapegoats in the old traditions, the folk healing, the ancient knowledge passed down through generations of women who had learned to survive by understanding nature's secrets. Elias knew none of this. To him, his mother was simply the woman who made everything better, who could cure his fever with bitter tea, who told him stories of brave knights and clever foxes, who held him close during thunderstorms and promised that morning always came after the darkest night. He should have cherished those promises more. The trouble began with Margareta Schultz's baby. Elias remembered the night clearly because it was the first time he had seen his mother truly afraid. The November wind howled against their shutters as heavy footsteps approached their door. When Anna opened it, Margareta stood there, her face pale as moonlight, clutching a bundle to her chest. "Please," Margareta whispered. "She won't stop crying. She's burning with fever and nothing I do helps. The physician says there's nothing more he can do." Anna took the baby without hesitation, her practiced hands feeling the child's forehead, checking her breathing. "Bring her inside. Elias, fetch me the willow bark from the chest." For 3 days, his mother barely slept. She prepared tinctures, sang lullabies in the old dialect, and pressed cool cloths to the baby's burning skin. Elias watched from the corner, fascinated by his mother's gentle efficiency, the way her fingers seemed to know exactly what to do. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. The baby's eyes opened, bright and curious, and she reached tiny fingers toward Anna's face. "Mein Gott," Margareta breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've saved her. You've brought her back from death itself." Anna shook her head quickly. "God saved her. I only helped her body remember how to heal." But word spread through Rothenburg like fire through dry thatch. Anna Zimmermann had saved the Schultz baby when even the physician had given up hope. Some called it a miracle, others whispered darker words. Pastor Johann Brenner heard the whisper. Pastor Brenner was a thin, severe man who had arrived in Rothenburg 3 years earlier, sent by the Bishop of Würzburg to strengthen Catholic orthodoxy in the region. Unlike the previous pastor, a gentle old man who had turned a blind eye to the village's old traditions, Brenner saw heresy everywhere. He preached sermons about the devil's servants hiding among the faithful, about women who consorted with dark forces, about the need for eternal vigilance against Satan's temptations. "The devil's greatest trick," he thundered from the pulpit, "is to make his servants appear as angels of mercy. Beware those who claim powers that belong to God alone. Elias didn't understand why his mother's face went so pale during these sermons, why she gripped his hand so tightly. He was 9 years old. He believed that good people were safe, that God protected the innocent, that his mother's healing hands could never be anything but blessed. He would learn how wrong he was. Winter settled over Rothenburg like a heavy shroud, and with it came hardship that made people desperate for someone to blame. The harvest had been poor. Disease swept through the livestock, and old Heinrich Weber died of a wasting sickness despite, or perhaps because of, the whispers suggested, drinking Anna's herbal remedies. She gave him something that made him worse, Frau Kellner told anyone who would listen. Mark my words, there's something unnatural about that woman. No godly person knows so much about herbs and roots. Elias began to notice the stares when he walked through the village square. Conversations stopped when his mother passed by. Children who had once played with him now crossed to the other side of the street, their mothers pulling them close and making the sign of the cross. Mutter, why don't people like us anymore? Elias asked one evening as they shared a simple supper of bread and thin soup. Anna's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment she looked older than her 32 years. Sometimes, mankind, when people are afraid and hurting, they need someone to blame. It's easier than accepting that bad things happen for no reason. But you help people. You make them better. I try to. Her voice was soft, sad. But fear makes people forget kindness. They see what they expect to see, not what's really there. That night, Elias woke to the sound of his mother crying. He crept from his bed and found her kneeling before their small wooden crucifix, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. Please, she whispered, protect my son. Whatever happens to me, let no harm come to him. She was praying to the same God that Pastor Brenner claimed to serve, but her prayers felt different, desperate, full of a fear that made Elias's stomach tight with worry he couldn't name. The end began on a Tuesday morning in February. Elias was feeding their single goat when he saw them coming up the path. Pastor Brenner, flanked by 2 men from the village council, and Jakob Stern, the local magistrate. Behind them walked 3 women whose faces were set with the righteous certainty of those who had finally found someone to blame for their troubles. Anna Zimmermann, Pastor Brenner's voice carried across the winter air, sharp as breaking ice. By the authority of the Holy Church and the civil magistrate, you are commanded to appear before the ecclesiastical court to answer charges of maleficium and consorting with evil spirits. Elias didn't understand the Latin words, but he understood his mother's sharp intake of breath, the way her hand flew to her throat. He dropped the feed bucket and ran to her side. What are the charges? Anna's voice was steadier than her hands. You are accused of practicing witchcraft, Magistrate Stern read from a parchment scroll, of healing by unnatural means, of possessing forbidden knowledge, and of causing the death of Heinrich Weber through malevolent arts. That's absurd, Anna replied, but her voice cracked. I've done nothing but try to help people. Everything I know comes from herbs and prayers. Prayers to whom? Pastor Brenner stepped closer, his pale eyes gleaming. The witnesses say you speak words in the old tongue, that you use symbols not found in any Christian text. They say you commune with spirits in the forest, that you gather your materials by moonlight like the old pagans. Elias looked up at his mother, confusion flooding his young mind. The old tongue was just the dialect his grandmother had taught her. The symbols were simply the marks she used to identify different herbs in her collection. The moonlight gathering was because that was when certain plants were most potent. She had explained it all to him so many times. But as he looked around at the faces of their neighbors, people who had once smiled at him, who had brought their children to his mother for healing, he saw only cold suspicion and fear-driven hatred. You will come with us now, the magistrate continued. The boy will be placed in the care of the church until this matter is resolved. No, the word tore from Anna's throat. She pulled Elias against her, her arms protective and desperate. He's done nothing wrong. He's just a child. The child of a suspected witch must be examined for corruption, Pastor Brenner said. We will determine whether Satan's influence has touched him as well. Elias felt his mother's body trembling against him. For the first time in his life, she couldn't make everything better. For the first time, her arms weren't strong enough to keep the world's darkness at bay. Please, she whispered, the word barely audible. He's innocent. But innocence, Elias would learn, was a luxury the frightened could no longer afford. They separated them immediately. Elias was taken to a small room in the rectory behind the church, a cold stone space with a single window set too high for him to see out. Brother Thomas, a young monk with kind eyes, brought him bread and water and tried to make conversation. But Elias couldn't eat. All he could think about was his mother, taken away in chains while the village watched in silence. "Where is she?" he asked Brother Thomas. "When can I see her?" "Soon, child. She's being questioned by the ecclesiastical court. They need to determine the truth of the accusations against her." The truth. As if truth mattered when fear had already made up its mind. What Elias didn't know, what no one told a 9-year-old boy, was that his mother was being held in the basement of the magistrate's house, a damp stone cell where suspected witches were examined, according to the practices outlined in the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous manual for identifying and prosecuting witches. The examination process was thorough and brutal. Anna was stripped and searched for witches' marks, any mole, birthmark, or scar that could be interpreted as a sign of demonic pact. When they found a small strawberry birthmark on her shoulder, Pastor Brenner declared it evidence of Satan's touch. She was subjected to the swimming test, tied hand and foot and thrown into the mill pond. When she sank, as innocent people naturally would, it should have proven her humanity. But the water was so cold that she nearly drowned before they pulled her out, and her desperate gasping for air was interpreted as proof that she was calling on dark powers to save her. The worst part was the sleep deprivation. For days they kept her awake, taking turns to question her, demanding that she confess to her crimes. They wanted names, other women in the village who might be part of her coven. They wanted details about her pacts with demons, about the evil she had worked, disguised as healing. "I've done nothing wrong," Anna repeated, her voice growing weaker with each passing day. "I've only tried to help people. Everything I know, I learned from my grandmother and she from hers. We are Christian women. We have always been faithful." But Pastor Brenner had read his theology. He knew that the devil was cunning, that witches would lie and deceive even under interrogation. Her refusal to confess was simply more evidence of her corruption. On the 5th day, they brought in the torturer. Elias knew something terrible had happened when Brother Thomas came to his room with tears in his eyes. "Your mother," the young monk began, then stopped, struggling for words. "She has confessed, child. She has admitted to her crimes and thrown herself upon the mercy of the church." "What crimes?" Elias's voice was small, confused. "She didn't do anything wrong." But Anna had confessed. After the torturer's tools had been shown to her, after she had been subjected to the strappado, her arms bound behind her back and her body hoisted by a rope until her shoulders dislocated, she had finally given them what they wanted to hear. Yes, she had made a pact with the devil. Yes, she had used dark magic to heal the sick and harm her enemies. Yes, she had corrupted her innocent son with her evil knowledge. She confessed to it all, signing her name to a document she could barely read through eyes swollen shut from beatings. It was a lie, of course. Every word of it was a desperate attempt to end the agony, to buy herself a quick death instead of prolonged torture. But lies born of torment were accepted as truth by men who had already decided what that truth would be. The sentence was pronounced the next morning. Death by fire, the traditional punishment for unrepentant witches. But because she had confessed and shown remorse, the church, in its mercy, would allow her to be strangled before the flames consumed her body. Small mercies in a world gone mad. They told Elias that his mother was a confessed witch, that she had admitted to serving Satan and corrupting the innocent. They expected him to renounce her, to thank God for exposing her evil before it could spread further. Instead, he wept. "She's not evil," he sobbed, his small fists pressed against his eyes. "She helped people. She made them better. She's not a witch." But 9-year-old boys, even ones defending their mothers, carry little weight against the machinery of religious justice. They made him watch. "It's for your spiritual education." Pastor Brenner explained as he led Elias to the village square on the morning of the execution. You must see the wages of sin, understand the fate that awaits those who turn from God's path. The entire village had gathered. Executions were public events, meant to serve as both entertainment and moral instruction. A wooden stake had been erected in the center of the square, surrounded by carefully stacked bundles of wood and straw. The smell of pitch and oil hung heavy in the air. When they brought Anna out, Elias barely recognized her. Her face was swollen and bruised, her hair tangled and dirty. She walked with difficulty, her shoulders still displaced from the torture, but she held her head high. When she saw Elias in the crowd, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "Remember that I love you." Pastor Brenner stood before the crowd and read the charges again, his voice carrying across the square as he detailed Anna's supposed crimes. The villagers listened with rapt attention, their faces showing a mixture of fear, excitement, and righteous satisfaction. "Let this be a lesson," the pastor concluded, "to any who would traffic with darkness. Let this be a warning that God's justice, though sometimes slow, is always certain." They tied Anna to the stake with rough rope, binding her hands behind her back and securing her feet to the wooden post. The executioner, a hooded man from a neighboring town, approached with the garrote, the cord that would strangle her before the flames could claim her. But something went wrong. Whether through incompetence or cruel design, the garrote didn't work properly. Anna didn't die quickly and cleanly as promised. When they lit the fire, she was still alive, still conscious, still able to feel every flame that touched her skin. Elias watched his mother burn alive. He watched her struggle against the ropes as the fire caught her dress. He heard her screams, sounds no child should ever hear, sounds that would echo in his nightmares for the rest of his life. He saw her look at him one last time, her eyes wide with pain and terror, before the smoke mercifully obscured his view. The crowd cheered. They cheered as an innocent woman died in agony, as a 9-year-old boy watched his world crumble into ash and smoke. They cheered because they had found their scapegoat, their sacrifice to appease their fears and restore their sense of control over a chaotic world. Elias didn't cheer. He couldn't even cry. The horror was too vast, too complete for tears. He simply stood there, a small figure in the crowd of celebrating adults, and watched everything he had ever loved burn away to nothing. When it was over, when the flames had died to embers and the crowd had dispersed, Brother Thomas led him away from the square. The young monk was weeping openly now, no longer able to maintain the pretense that justice had been served. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the boy. "God forgive us all, I'm so sorry." But apologies, like innocence, were luxuries the world could no longer afford. Elias Zimmerman survived, but the boy who had lived in that cottage at the edge of Rothenburg died with his mother in the flames. He was sent to live with distant relatives in Bavaria, people who had never known Anna, and who accepted the church's version of events without question. They were not unkind, but they watched him carefully for signs of his mother's corruption, ready to report any suspicious behavior to the local authorities. He learned to hide his grief, to pretend that he didn't remember the gentle woman who had sung lullabies and healed the sick with herbs from the forest. He learned to nod respectfully when adults spoke about the righteousness of his mother's execution, to agree that the church had saved his soul from damnation. But late at night, when the house was silent and his guardians were asleep, Elias would remember. He would remember his mother's hands, soft and capable, crushing herbs between her fingers. He would remember her voice, warm and loving, telling him stories of brave knights and clever foxes. He would remember her promise that morning always came after the darkest night. The witch trials in Germany continued for decades after Anna's death. Historians estimate that between 1450 and 1750, somewhere between 12,000 and 25,000 people were executed for witchcraft in the German territories alone. Most were women. Many were healers, midwives, or simply individuals who possessed knowledge that threatened established authority. They were not witches. They were herbalists, wise women, keepers of traditional knowledge that had helped communities survive for centuries. They were casualties of a world in transition, victims of religious authorities consolidating power, scapegoats for societies struggling to understand and control the chaos of their changing times. Anna Zimmerman was one name among thousands, one story among countless tragedies. But for Elias, she was the entire world. A world that burned away in a single morning, while neighbors cheered and called it justice. The boy grew into a man who never spoke of his childhood, who never married, who lived quietly on the edges of society. He became a scribe, copying documents for merchants and lawyers, his handwriting careful and precise. Sometimes, when no one was watching, he would write his mother's name in the margins of legal documents. Anna Zimmerman, innocent. A small act of remembrance and defiance. He died in 1738, an old man whose true story died with him. But his mother's legacy lived on in different ways. In the gradual decline of witch trials as the Age of Enlightenment brought new ways of thinking about evidence and justice. In the slow recognition that fear and superstition had led to the murder of thousands of innocent people. In the growing understanding that the real evil had not been in the accused, but in the accusers. The boy who watched his mother burn reminds us that history is not an abstract collection of dates and events, but a tapestry woven from individual human experiences, from love and loss, courage and cowardice, justice and unspeakable cruelty. Anna Zimmerman's story is one thread in that tapestry, but it illuminates the larger pattern. How fear can transform neighbors into enemies, how authority can become tyranny, how the desperate need to explain suffering can lead to the creation of suffering far worse than any we seek to understand. In our own time, when fear still drives communities to seek scapegoats, when authority still claims divine sanction for earthly cruelty, when the vulnerable still find themselves accused of crimes they never committed, the story of Elias and Anna speaks across the centuries. It whispers a warning about the price of silence in the face of injustice, about the cost of choosing comfort over courage, about the eternal human capacity for both evil and redemption. The boy who watched his mother burn grew up in a world where love was not enough to protect the innocent. Our challenge, our obligation to his memory, and to all the Anna Zimmermans of history, is to build a world where love might finally be enough, where the darkness that consumed a 9-year-old's world in 1672 can never again masquerade as the light of righteousness. Some fires, once lit, can never be extinguished, but perhaps, in remembering, we can ensure they are never lit again.